Welcome back to Palestine Bookshelf. I'm Stephen Heiner, and today we're going to be discussing a very short history of the Israel-Palestine conflict by Ilan Pappe. This came out in 2024, and I think it was a reaction to, obviously, October the 7th, and the curiosity that people have had, asking themselves, why are all these people getting murdered? Why are unarmed men, women, and children being bombed by the Israeli Air Force? Well, Ilan Pappe has an answer for you in a short book, about 140 pages or so. It manages to cover quite a lot of ground in a short amount of time, and in many ways accomplishes what we're trying to do at Palestine Bookshelf, which is to cover a very wide amount of information, giving opportunities for people to go deeper in things that matter to them. So, for example, someone wants to go deeper on the settlements, or they want to go deeper on 1948, or they want to go deeper on right of refugee return. I'm trying to do that through this project, and he is doing this in a book form. And that's why I really appreciate it. So let's jump in and hear what he has to say. So around the 1880s is when we start to see Jewish immigration into Palestine. A group of young Jews made plans to settle in Palestine, hoping their zeal and purpose would inspire others to follow their example. They arrived in Palestine in 1882. They were able to buy land in Palestine with money provided by Jewish philanthropists and businessmen such as the Rothschilds. The land they bought was mostly owned by absentee landlords, that is, rich people who lived outside of Palestine, who had purchased land from the Ottoman state after reforms in Ottoman land law in the mid-19th century. Before these reforms, individuals generally couldn't own land as private property in the Ottoman Empire. It was leased by the empire to landlords or farmers who built their villages on it. Many of these villages had been there for centuries. In Palestine, some of these villages even predated the existence of the empire. But under the new land regime, the village's land, previously leased from the state, was now the private property of a landlord. However, in the Ottoman understanding, the fact of land changing hands didn't alter anything in practical terms. The land, it was understood, came with the tenants attached, that is, the villagers and their villages. As the first Zionist settlers wanted to form their own agricultural collectives, their initial purchases were of uncultivated land, where largely no one lived. This would change when British rule commenced after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire at the end of the First World War, as we will see later. And if you'd like to know more about the legality of the British Mandate, which I dispute, given articles like John Quigley's, I'll put a link in the description as well as a card. That's a sidebar, and that's a topic that you can go further down. The Zionist movement appealed to the British rulers of Mandatory Palestine to disregard the Ottoman custom. They demanded that the British recognize that land ownership meant they had the right to evict Palestinian villagers. Originally, the British promised the Kingdom of Iraq to Sharif Hussein's elder son Abdullah, and the Kingdom of Syria to his younger son Faisal. But Britain had also agreed that Syria would be under France's control in the Sykes-Picot Agreement, so it was no longer theirs to give away. Making contradictory promises to different parties is something of a theme in Britain's foreign relations. And not just here, either. But that's probably another video, maybe another channel, probably. At the start of the British Mandate, Jews constituted roughly 11% of the population, but they had been promised Palestine as their future home by the League of Nations and in the Constitution for Palestine drafted by the British. During the years of British rule, the British government tried to manufacture Palestinian consent to losing their own country by offering solutions like partition, federation, and forming a binational state. They did not offer to respect the mandatory principle that the majority of the people in a country have the right to decide its future, as happened in all the neighboring Arab countries. And even when the Palestinian leadership was willing to countenance accepting the presence of Jewish settlers in a future Palestine, Britain did not dare to impose on the Zionist movement any solution that did not include a Jewish state over part or the whole of Palestine. Britain wasn't able to stand up to the Zionists, neither the U.S., and now the entire world. Nobody stands up to them, in part because they're afraid of being called anti Semitic, but in part because they have no courage to help the Palestinians, because the Palestinians don't have anything they want. The very existence of the Palestine Arab Congress dispels two myths often propagated by those who don't know any better: that the conflict is one between Muslims and Jews, and that Palestine has no national identity, that Palestine had no national identity of its own before 1948. Since the beginning of the Palestinian national movement, Christians have played a crucial role in it. As early as 1911, two Orthodox Christian cousins launched the newspaper Palestine, championing an Arab Palestine and raising early alarm about Zionist ambitions. This should give us pause for thought, as even today, a common Israeli narrative insists that Palestine has no history of nationalism prior to Israel's founding. In 1972, the Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir famously said, "There is no such thing as the Palestinian people." Too many Israelis still echo that sentiment today. And you can disbelieve it all you want, the facts are there. You can say there's no such thing as a Palestinian people, and yet there are. The Zionist presence at this time, this is during the Mandate, was still relatively limited, and the impossible question of how to build a Jewish homeland in another people's country had yet to be answered, and the British position remained subject to change. Especially in the first half of the 1920s, coexistence between the two communities remained possible. And I've referred to this strange sense of hopefulness that I found in Tom Segev's One Palestine Complete, that there was actually so many different possibilities that could have eventuated from that time period, and yet only the worst one prevailed. Even, I'll put a link to well, there were 3 videos that I did, but I'll put a link to one of the videos that I did on Tom Segev's book, and a card for it, and a link in the description. Even though Arab workers were excluded from the Zionist trade union Histadrut, there were still joint strikes by Arab and Jewish workers, such as in the tailoring and carpentry industries in Haifa in 1925. Arabs and Jews still founded new businesses together. More than 1,000 joint businesses opened up in this decade. Facts were being established on the ground. But the catastrophe that followed wasn't inevitable. It only became so once the character of the Zionist movement fundamentally changed. And I'm going to read that sentence one more time. Arabs and Jews still founded new businesses together. More than 1,000 joint businesses opened up in this decade. 1,000 in 10 years. Imagine how prosperous and wonderful Palestine could have been as a country if these people were able to live together in peace, instead of one racist, supremacist group of people kicking everybody who wasn't them out and insisting that they had the right to all the land themselves exclusively. What a country that could have been. The Palestinian leadership believed, with no small amount of naivete, that as they were both the native population and the majority, the UN would obviously make Palestine a state for the Palestinians. The Zionist leaders believed that actions speak louder than words. They correctly calculated that the international community would not help the Palestinians reclaim what the Zionists had taken by force to begin with. So they planned to conquer all key strategic posts as soon as British troops vacated them: radio, postal services, telecommunications, railways, airspace, public transport, banking, and of course, land. I want to repeat that because that's just as true in 1948 as it is today. The international community would not help the Palestinians reclaim what the Zionists had taken by force to begin with. One, because the international community is unwilling to stand up to the Zionists, for whatever reason. They're afraid of being called names, or they're afraid of what Mossad will do to them. But secondly, they're not willing to risk people to help the Palestinians because, again, the Palestinians don't have anything they want, like oil, cobalt, diamonds. If the Palestinians had vital resources that some country wanted, somehow a solution might be found. But as it is, the international community will not help Palestinians reclaim what the Zionists had taken by force to begin with. Those are just the facts. One of the things you'll hear Zionists claim is that Arabs are heartless because they won't take refugees into their countries. And what this misses, maybe perhaps on purpose, is that doing so is going to recognize and legitimate the theft of the Zionists. In 1950, one more body was founded, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA. This agency was meant to provide for nearly 1 million Palestinian refugees while they waited to return home. It built the refugee camps that are now familiar parts of cities such as Beirut, Damascus, and Amman. Given the UN commitment to the right of return for refugees, refugees did not accept citizenship elsewhere, nor did they build new homes in their host countries. They did not want to imply that they were reconciled to their dispossession. In any case, many Arab countries like Lebanon did not offer the option of claiming citizenship. And sometimes in Lebanon, they didn't even have the right to work legally. If you want to know more about Lebanon, I did a live stream about that shortly after coming back from Beirut this summer. Jordan did, but only half of the refugee community there took it up. So it indicates even when given the chance to have a passport, people felt it was ideological to receive that passport and they didn't. So now that you've pushed the Palestinians out, if you're Zionists, you want other Jews to come in. The problem is a lot of the Jews in the Middle East were very comfortable where they are. They lived there in peace with Muslims for centuries, counter to the narrative that Zionists would have you believe that every Muslim is getting ready to stab a Jew. That you have Iraqi Jews like Avi Shleim, who lived in Iraq. They felt at home in Iraq. They felt part of the culture and part of the community. Same in Morocco. Well, this couldn't stand. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, the Zionist movement primarily targeted the Iraqi Jewish community, one of the oldest continuous Jewish communities in the world, dating back to the Old Testament. How did the Zionist leadership get them to emigrate en masse? First, the Israeli intelligence service, Mossad, conducted false flag terror operations to sow fear among the Jewish community, including planting bombs in synagogues and other community centers. Second, Israel made a secret agreement with Iraq's prime minister, Nouri al-Said, who happily passed legislation against Jews, spurring them to leave. He took this as an opportunity to seize their substantial property and capital. And there were crimes against the Jewish communities in these countries. Things were stolen from them, land was stolen from them, and that's actually one of those lesser-known stories which we will cover later this year, I hope. The land claims of Jews in Arab countries during the expulsions. But as I say, it's lesser known and you need more context for it, and I hope to speak about that in the future. And yet, what happens when they've managed to scare these Iraqi Jews and bring them to Israel? They're made to feel less than. The veteran Zionist leadership regarded Jews arriving from Arab and Muslim countries as inferior and wasn't afraid to show its contempt. Upon arriving in Israel, many Arab Jews were sprayed with DDT in a purposeful humiliation ritual. Zionists thought these Jews needed to be de-Arabized. Authorities broke down large extended families into nuclear families and made sure young children were educated only in Hebrew and indoctrinated into believing in the valor of the Israeli state, while deliberately keeping Arab Jews on the margins of society. Many of those who arrived, no matter what job they did in their home country, were resettled in poor border towns next to the neighboring Arab states, and, due to lack of options, were forced to take unskilled jobs. To be recognized as an equal by the European Jews who made up the Israeli elite, it was obvious one had to disavow one's Arab past wholly and utterly. This aggressive project has, in large part, succeeded. Today, Arab Jews form one of the largest voting blocs for right-wing parties in Israel, and are often the most vociferous advocates for violence against Palestinians. They have proven themselves as the most unyielding partisans of Zionism, even if they still haven't achieved equality. They don't know they're never going to be accepted, no matter how hard they try. So in 1967, we have land grabs, even though the Israelis promised the U.S. there were going to be no land grabs. They grab the Golan, they take the West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, the Sinai. The first decision the government made was to let the majority of Palestinians stay in the new occupied areas, only expelling a relatively small number, at least compared to 1948. In total, Israel removed roughly 300,000 Palestinians from the territories occupied in 1967, mainly from the refugee camps near Jericho, the old city of Jerusalem, and the greater Jerusalem area. Second, the Israeli government made the choice not to grant Israeli citizenship to Palestinians in the occupied territories. This was more controversial within the administration. Some ministers wondered how long someone could live as a subject of a government without any of the rights of citizenship. Moshe Dayan, the Minister of Defense, said bluntly that people could live like this for at least 50 years. And it's been more than 50 years since 1967, and what do we see? All of the pressure building up. In other words, they had no interest in the setup being temporary. And remember what Dayan says at this time to the people. He says, we have to the Palestinians, we have no solution. Those who want to leave will leave. The rest of you will live like dogs, and we will see what happens. The only reason I have that memorized is I've heard it cited so many times. Dayan said that to the Palestinians. You all will live like dogs, and we will see what happens. That is how they think of these people. In practice, we have learned that you can only deprive millions of people of citizenship, that is, the right to have a say in the decisions that shape their lives, by systemic oppression. You can only maintain this kind of status quo by a system of policing and control that violates their basic civil and human rights. For that purpose, the emergency regulations used to control the Palestinian minority inside Israel until 1967 were applied to the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, just as the Shaham team had planned prior to the war. These regulations gave absolute power to the army to detain people without trial, to close businesses, schools, and workplaces, to impose curfews and closures, and to expel people and harass civilians with impunity. So this system continues for many years, would take from 67 to about 1978. As a Palestinian in the West Bank or the Gaza Strip, you could not move about, have a job, go to university, or attend a hospital without obtaining the necessary permits from the civil administration. These permits would be examined at checkpoints. These became the bane of Palestinians' daily existence. Soldiers bullied, abused, and persecuted Palestinians as a matter of course. The Israeli Security Service used the checkpoints to exert pressure on Palestinians to collaborate as informers or be refused the permits they needed. The local Palestinian leadership under occupation responded in 1978 by creating a national committee, Lajnat al-Tawji, the Committee of Guidance in Arabic. It sought non-violent means of ending the occupation. Once again, non-violent means. How does Israel respond to non-violent protest? Its leaders were arrested by the Israeli army and attacked by Jewish settlers. What a surprise. Remember, every accusation is a confession. This gets us to the Madrid conference in 1991. Again, we're skipping forward because this is a very short history and we're trying to cover as much ground as possible. Palestinians were more hopeful about this conference than previous efforts because this time they would be included in the negotiations over the future of Palestine. Even as early as the late 1980s, before the invasion of Kuwait, the U.S. was willing to open direct negotiations with the PLO in Tunis, sensing that the organization and its leader were very keen to be part of a Pax Americana. They knew that Arafat was prepared to recognize Israel and renounce armed struggle, or, as the U.S. and Israel described it, terrorism. What Americans could not foresee was that even such dramatic steps would not persuade Israel to halt its colonization of the West Bank and Greater Jerusalem, nor was Israel willing to enter into serious negotiations for a two-state solution. Whether it was Likud or Labor in power, just like in the United States, whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats, the Israeli government had no inclination whatsoever to give up the territory won in the 1948 and 1967 wars. Israel had effectively taken over all of historical Palestine and removed millions of Palestinians from their homes. For successive Israeli administrations, this was the prime achievement of the Jewish state. And you have to realize, too, what is happening at Madrid is a split in the Palestinians between the PLO in Tunisia and seen by the U.S. as the people you could make a deal with, and the very serious Palestinians. When I say very serious, they're very focused on issues such as right of return, water, electricity. How are you going to live day to day? And they're actually living there, and they're working at a very famous place called Orient House in Jerusalem, which was the center of trying to figure out how to solve this problem. The PLO were living in Tunisia. Now, again, Palestinians, if you talk to them, they have all sorts of beef with the PLO and the PA, but it didn't seem that Orient House had enough support to be considered a serious negotiation partner with the U.S. And remember, they're looking for someone they can control anyway. And so the U.S. and Israel target the PLO as the people that they're going to do the deal with. The Madrid Peace Conference ended in complete failure. It was dominated by a paradigm of conflict resolution that ignored the actual causes of the conflict. Emblematic of this was the decision to postpone discussion about the status of Jerusalem and the right of return of refugees indefinitely, two crucial bones of contention. So let's make sure we don't talk about the most important things ever, indefinitely. And then to the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative, which would have guaranteed recognition for Israel across all Arab states and provided for a genuine two-state solution based on the pre-war 1967 borders. In an astounding compromise, the final wording adopted did not mention the right of return for refugees. However, Israel rejected the plan entirely, and the U.S. supported its position. Remember, we're always told that the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity, that they're the ones who are rejecting peace plans. But the Arab Initiative in 2002, and I'm going to repeat, would have guaranteed recognition for Israel across all Arab states, provided for a genuine two-state solution on the pre-1967 borders, and not even mentioning the right of refugee return, which would have been a major defeat. Even then, Israel won't accept it. Why? Because Israel's not interested in a two-state solution, because Israel's not interested in peace, because Israel not only wants all of the land, which you can see in that map, but they want all the rest of it too. Greater Israel. That is the goal, and we start to see Israel flexing in this new phase post the fall of Assad in Syria. If you like what you heard, consider liking, subscribing, sharing this with people who you know are open to learning more about the conflict now that they've had a chance to see babies getting murdered on a regular basis by the quote-unquote most moral army in the world. You can support the channel by buying this book. There's a link to buy it in the description. If you want to thank us for what we're doing, you can use Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal to send a one-time donation. Otherwise, you can become a Patreon or a YouTube member and support the work on a more ongoing basis. And you'll get access to these videos early, as well as a chance to talk to me privately on live streams, ask questions about the process, and suggest books. If you'd like to suggest books in another way, you can do that by going to my wish list. And you can pick books from there to send to me, and I will do my best to review them in a timely manner. Remember that portions of different donations that come in will go towards the Palestine Children's Relief Fund. This is a wonderful organization that helps children who could not otherwise get medical care in Palestine. If you want to support them directly, please follow the link in the description and go support them directly. If you want to support them indirectly, you can do so by supporting this work. Until next time, enjoy your reading.